Today I'm working with an Arduino, and I have a circuit that I'm happy with. I have a signal coming in from a button that's then allowing the Arduino to make a decision to send out a signal to the servo to cause it to turn. And I'm happy with the circuit. I want to move forward and make it more rigid. And so to do that, I'm going to develop a printed circuit board of it, which is referred to as a PCB. To develop the software components of that, I'm going to utilize a software called Autodesk Eagle. And the steps I'm going to need to take are, I'm going to have to develop a schematic of it, which represents all the components that I have. Here's my button, here's the resistor, here's something that represents my servo, and here's something that represents the Arduino. Once I have that schematic developed, I can then sit there and develop a board view, which has the physical sizes of those parts on the board, and it allows us to then send this off to get machined. And it'll make it to where this was once a copper sheet, and the only thing that will be left is my green pads and the traces or wires between them. So let's go in, let's start our first schematic. So I'm going to go in, New, select Schematic. I already have a library of the parts built up for me, which makes that rather nice. So I'm going to go in and add a component right here. I go into my library, and I'm going to bring in a servo, and this servo is really just 3 header pins that I've titled servo in there. I can place it wherever I want in this space, and realize also when I right click it causes the part to rotate. So I'm going to set right there. I'm going to add in my button. So I'm going to grab my button, click OK. I'm going to rotate it also. Let me go grab my resistor. Alright. And the last thing I need to do is I need to figure out what I need to use to represent my Arduino. So I go back to my circuit, and I'm going to look at my Arduino. I'm going to figure out how many connections I have that are going into it. And so I only have 4 of those, so I'm going to use a 4 header pin to represent my Arduino, and that allows me not have to represent all the different pins on the Arduino. So grab 4 header pins, okay, and we'll add those in. With that accomplished, now I need to draw in my wires. And so I try to think of a way that allows me to set up the wires so that they don't cross. So if they don't cross, I know that when I mill out the the board, it's not going to have any shorts in it, right? And so I typically try to start with my more complex part. And so this row 5 here, where I have the button, the resistor, and the wire all going into the same row, and they're connected, is my more complex area. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to go into pin 3. All right. And then I'm going to come over from my power, come over from my ground, and you'll see I've met a couple of those constraints I've set, right? So I have my wire coming over, I have it reaching this, I have it going and getting my power and my ground, and I'm not seeing really any crossing of wires, which I think is a real positive. I'm going to add in my servo here. And so adding in the ground and the signal wire is really easy, but once we've done that, we sort of blocked off how we're setting up. So I'm going to have to take my power wire over and connect it, and it's going to be crossing. So I have to think about, when I build my board, how do I make it to where I don't deal with that crossing moving forward? But the circuit's done, so I can move over to the board. Make that a little bigger for you. And what it does is it sort of brings in all the parts for me right there. And I get to move and place them on my board, which is this black area over here. So I'm going to select Move. all these parts have a little handle, and they had that in the schematic view also. And I'm going to sit there and then right click and cause my part to rotate. And what I'm looking for is a way that I can position this so that when I have the parts fully rotated, it looks like that, where what I have is just straight lines between my parts. And so now I'm going to break that rule immediately after I say that and say that's the way I want it on this resistor. The reason is I do have these straight lines here, right? I know this is my row 5 from my breadboard, and so these will just all connect. And the wire going over here to the servo is actually going to ground. So you rotate that. One more. Right there. And that looks like I did everything wrong. But as I start building up my button circuit right there, it's going to make it a little bit more sense. So I'm going to go back and make the same connection I started out with my schematic, which is just the wire between my button and my resistor. And now connecting right there. And so that's my row 5. I'm now going to take power to my button. And if I right click, you can notice that it changes the way that it draws this trace here of the wire. And so I like the 45-degree angle typically. So we get right there and drive it in. And you'll notice that this wire jumped over. And this is sort of where you see the trick you have to utilize when developing PCBs, is that you're not going to typically be able to take every wire directly to the spot you want it to be. And so I'm going to go around the back here and in on my power wire for my servo. I'm then going to have my wire come in for my signal to that same servo. Let's go down here, go over, and then go back up. And that leaves just the connections for my ground. Right there. Right there. So I can now sit there and adjust the size of this board. And if I was in industry, my goal here would be to get this as small as I possibly can. The reason is that the smaller it is, the cheaper it's going to make, or the more I can put on the board. And so if I was going to send this off to get machined, I would probably try to shrink this down as far as I possibly could. And so I'd bring this over to the edge, leaving just maybe a 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch, and then just sort of bring everything else close to where it was combined. And that would allow it to be, when I sent this off, and make it to be a very cheap endeavor to do so. So that's where we're at. My next step will be to sort up the files and send those off, but I've gotten to where I need to in this video. And so I hope that gives you the necessary steps that you need to get started with it. And good luck.